Hello friends and welcome back to a video confession. Basically, I bought a bunch of books. So this is not going to be like a thorough, thoughtful video that's going to change the way you think or give you some insight into some interesting new books. No, this is just a good old-fashioned haul. I have bought a lot of books this year. I think there's a lot of different reasons for that. One is that, you know, I work in a bookshop now. I started there last year, but I mean, when you work in a bookshop and you have a really good discount, like, you're going to buy some books. It's just going to happen. Also, I've been trying to get more into reading fiction, and I think fiction I do just read more of. Like, I read it more quickly, so I get through more stuff. But I think the biggest reason, above all else, that I've bought so many books this year is because of the whole coronavirus lockdown situation. And this stack of books I have next to me is basically the result of the most recent lockdown in Melbourne. About 2 weeks ago now, I think. I don't know. Time is a blur. I don't even know what day it is, to be honest. Melbourne went into stage 4 lockdown, which is a level up from what we were the first time round. And it's pretty intense. We're not really allowed to leave our house, and if we do, it's only for an hour a day. Like, there's a lot of rules. And when that was originally announced, a lot of people went out and panic bought loo roll and meat for some reason. I panic bought books. So let's try to make the most of the situation and at least get some fun content out of it. This first one is poetry. Look at me trying to read poetry. It's A Portable Paradise by Roger Robinson. This is just a short volume, and I don't know a lot about it other than that my friend at work bought it and read it and loved it. From what I understand, Roger Robinson is a black man living in the UK, and I think this volume has been a bit of a big deal. It won the T.S. Eliot Prize last year. And my friend at work reads interesting stuff that I normally wouldn't pick up for myself. I just value his recommendation, and this looked interesting, so I picked it up. This next book is one I've been looking forward to reading. It's one I've heard so much about online. It is The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett. This one, everybody's been talking about the last, I don't know, few months, I feel like, on BookTube. And I don't always find myself wanting to read like the BookTube books, but this one looked and sounded really good. If you've been watching any of my videos, you know that I don't like to kind of learn too much about books before I read them. I've just heard people raving about it and that they love this book. And I think basically the premise is that two twin sisters living in America, one chooses to more or less embrace her black identity and lives in a black community, and I think ends up having a daughter who's black, whereas the other sister chooses to kind of really step into her white passing and I think more or less secretly lives as if she is white, and kind of really detaches from her black identity. And it's just about their two very, very different experiences. And that just sounded really interesting. And I've heard nothing but good things. Everyone that I've seen who's read this has loved it. So I'm definitely very curious. The next one, I'm not gonna lie, I partially bought because the cover's so pretty. It's Latitudes of Longing by Shubhangi Swarup. Look at it. I love a colourful, pretty cover. Now, I think this is quite a big novel in terms of its scope. I think it follows quite a lot of different people and characters, and also kind of moves across India. In the feverish tropics of Andaman Islands, a young botanist is entranced by his wife's fierce nature and unusual gifts, speaking to trees and the ghosts of former colonialists. These islands, she tells her adoring husband, rest on a fault line cracked so deep into the earth that spirits cross the boundary freely. So I don't really know the specifics of the story or the plot, I suppose, but from what I can tell, people seem to think this is very imaginative and lyrical, and I've heard a lot of people say that it's just really unique, so I'm curious. Now this next one I basically picked up because it was on sale and it looked pretty. And it is Home Fire, a novel by Camilla Shamsi, I think. I love the colours. Now this one I think is about a family and also their experience of, I think their father or someone in their family was a jihadist. I think there's also a bit of a romance element, although that is complicated by politics and family history. So, sounds interesting. It explores how secrets and family loyalty can bind lives together and threaten to spin them out of control. Searing and suspenseful, Home Fire asks, what sacrifices will we make in the name of love? This one I've been looking forward to. This is After Australia, which is like an anthology edited by Michael Muhammad Ahmed. This one I think will be really good. Now this is fiction, a collection of fiction. I think it's basically speculative fiction in which 12 Australian, Indigenous and other people of colour authors kind of give us an insight into what they think Australia in 2050 is going to look like. Or at the very least what it could look like. So I think this I've been really excited for since I heard about its release. After empire, after colony, after white supremacy, 12 diverse writers imagine an alternative Australia. I only know a few of the authors like Claire G. Coleman and Amberlynn Quay-Mulliner, and a couple of others, but for the most part this will be a great introduction to some new voices for me as well, which is one of the reasons I love collections and anthologies, but also just this topic in and of itself. Juicy. Next actually is a book by Amberlynn Quay-Mulliner. This is Catching Telecrow. I ordered this because I recently read this author's Living on Stolen Land, which I absolutely loved. It's one of my favorite books of the year. So whenever I really love a book, I always want to read more from the author. So I picked this one up. Now I think this is a bit of an unusual novel, and from what I understand it is told from two perspectives. I think those two perspectives are Beth, who is dead, and her father, who's a detective. Told in two unforgettable voices, this gripping novel weaves together themes of grief, colonial history, violence, love, and family. So that just sounds really intriguing, and I'm always looking out for more Australian fiction, particularly written by Aboriginal authors. So I'm very excited for this one. This next one was recommended to me recently, actually, and it is Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. Now this is another story about two sisters. I think one lives in the Dominican Republic and the other in New York City, and their father dies in a plane crash at the beginning of the book. And people that I've heard speak about this book rave about it. They love it. And it is written in verse. So something a little bit different, which I'm a bit nervous about, but also very excited about. The next book I know is kind of a bit of a big deal. It is Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid. This one I picked up basically after everything that happened with the reading rush, and we found out that this was supposed to be the group read, but very few of us actually knew about it. So I think this is an interesting story of race in America, and how the good intentions of white allies can sometimes be actually a whole lot more harmful than helpful. When Amira is apprehended at the supermarket for kidnapping the white child she's actually babysitting, it sets off an explosive chain of events. Her employer, Alex, a feminist blogger with the best of intentions, resolves to make things right. So it seems like this is a book about the messy dynamics of privilege. And I just felt like, given that I participated in the reading rush and this was supposed to be the group read, I felt it important that I read it. Now, our next non-fiction read is also an anthology. This is An Intervention. Basically, the intervention was like a set of policies that was introduced by the Howard government, so the Australian government, in 2007, I think it was. And this was basically implemented by the Australian government in the Northern Territory, which has a very high population of Aboriginal people and Aboriginal communities. It was implemented under the guise of like helping a very disadvantaged, vulnerable community and group of people, but it is hugely discriminatory and has caused a lot more harm than good. And a lot of the policies and stuff are still in place in different ways, despite us knowing that a lot of them have been very harmful. So I know a bit about the intervention, just by virtue of being an Australian and like hearing the news and being like somewhat invested in Aboriginal activism. But I don't know enough, especially because it was brought in and kind of debated when I was a bit younger. It was brought in when I was in high school and I wasn't very politically engaged back then. So it is a subject I have a lot to learn about, and so I thought this would be a good place to start. So I felt like that was an important one for me to pick up. Another poetry collection, this is Throat by Ellen Van Nerven. Apparently this collection of poetry shines a light on Australia's unreconciled past and precarious present with humour and heart. Unsparing in its interrogation of a colonial impulse, this book is fiercely loyal in voicing our truth and telling the stories that make us who we are. And this one's won a few awards, I think, in particular the Quentin Bryce Award, which is probably why I've been seeing it everywhere lately. Next up we have 2 volumes of manga. This one is A Bride's Story. This I have had recommended to me so many times. It is a longer series, I think, at this point. I just wanted to pick up the first one and give it a try. From what I understand, this is kind of like a slice of life historical manga story. So this is set in the 19th century in the Silk Road. And it's about a young woman from a nomadic tribe who's betrothed to a 12-year-old boy 8 years her junior. So from everything that I've heard, this has been tackled beautifully. And it's basically a story of cultural differences, but also of these 2 young people trying to figure out what a relationship between them looks like. And it's just been one of those things that I've wanted to pick up for a while. So I did. Another one that's been on my list for a while is just one single volume, but it's a chunky one. It's In This Corner of the World. And this is set in 1940s Hiroshima Prefecture. So this is a story about our main character, Suzu and trying to survive in a world in turmoil and coming to grips with the horrors of the war and trying to survive. From what I understand, this has been made into a film. I haven't seen the film or anything. I've just heard wonderful things about this, that it's emotional and difficult just as you expect, but that it's been handled really well and that ultimately it's really human and really beautiful. So I was glad I could finally pick this one up. Then another one I picked up that I thought was manga but is actually a light novel. My bad, was I Had That Same Dream Again. And this is the story of like a young school girl who gets to know a few different people. So she ends up trying to get to know an unhappy girl who engages in self-harm, a woman ostracized by society, and an old woman looking to live out her twilight years in peace. So I don't really know what I was expecting from this one. It just sounded really kind of like bittersweet and emotional, and it just got my interest. So I did what us book nerds do. I bought a book. And the very last book I picked up was The Mountains Sing by Nguyen Phang Quay Mai. I think like Latitudes of Longing, this is quite like a big story and covers a lot of ground, but it is set in Vietnam and around the time of the Vietnam War, I think, and it's kind of like a multi-generational family story. And I think this revolves around the relationship between the grandmother and the granddaughter. I've heard this is a bit of a difficult read emotionally. Like obviously there is the backdrop of the Vietnam War and like a family being torn apart and some tricky stuff, emotional stuff to read, but that it is hugely rewarding and utterly beautiful. Also, I have glitter all over it from when I did my eyeshadow. So what's that? 14? 14 new books, because we all know I desperately needed to add on to the 21 books and more. Oh my god, I have so many books to read, but I'm not mad. I'm not mad. I'll get to them eventually. I'm not someone who's too worried about like reading everything super quickly. Some books are on my shelf for years before I get to them, and I like having the variety and the option because I'm such a mood reader that I do float around in what I feel like reading. So these will be here for me for when I'm ready for them. But I hope you had fun hanging out with me and chatting about some new books. I'd usually say, let me know what books you're reading, but then I just end up mining the comments for new recommendations. But at least I didn't panic buy all the toilet paper, right? As always, thank you so much to my patrons over on Patreon for all of your support. A big extra special thank you goes to Tracy Timmerman, Laurie, Lynette Brown, The Hales K, and Carly Gravatt. And thank you so much for watching. I will talk to you in the comments and in the next video. Until then, so much love. Bye.